Turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to do better. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just, how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to Kamala Harris's open border, we've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartels. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago.
There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference. It's not infringing on your Second Amendment. And the idea to have some of these weapons out there, it just doesn't make any sense. Kamala Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of.
And here, J.D. Vance, not really a satisfying answer either. After 9/11, did we turn airports into gun-free zones? The answer was no. No, of course, we fortified the airports. And since then, there hasn't really been any major terrorist attack on airports. And the reason for that is because when there's something that important, you have to protect it.
The frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland is, okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor, your time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris.
After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should fight about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course, they don't agree with me and Donald Trump on every issue. We don't have to agree on every issue, but we're united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day, some with the American flag. Several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state Capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, "We're marching to the governor's residence, and there may be casualties." The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police. And I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together.
Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you, if you're still up. But there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz, you folks at CBS, and of course the American people for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies. Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating in the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle. I'm Margaret Brennan.
And I'm Nora O'Donnell. And a reminder, there are just 35 days until Election Day. Please get out and vote. And for all of us here at CBS News, thank you and good night.
The vice presidential debate on CBS tonight. And, overall, I think there was no major moment that is going to be something that is going to drastically change the dynamic of this campaign. Of course, the vice president, this is, less important than the presidential debate. We had one debate between Trump and Biden, one debate between Trump and Kamala Harris, and now one debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. And that's most likely the only debate that we will have from now until the election. I think this debate is not going to do much. First, because it's the vice president. It's not as important as the presidential debate. And it was probably a lot of less people will follow this debate than the other two. But also in terms of moments, there's a lot less moments that will go viral, a lot less moments that will remain in the public consciousness. And I think a lot of it has to do with the personalities of both of these vice presidential candidates. With Donald Trump, you have obviously a personality that is going to, focus all the attention, the media attention, and the people's attention on the discussion. With Kamala Harris, she's also, sort of I wouldn't want to say a controversial figure, but she was sort of the most left-leaning Democrat in the Senate. So as such, people really wanted to see her talk and see, is she going to have the same policies as a presidential candidate as she had as a senator? And of course, she changed a lot on that. But, the two candidates, the top of the ticket, they have stronger personalities than this vice presidential candidates here. J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, sort of boring guys. And, just how much in the way they talk and their rhetoric as in their political ideas, they don't really have much to bring to the table on the ticket. And perhaps this is the reason why they were chosen as vice presidents, is because they wouldn't overshadow the top of the ticket. And so in that regard, this vice presidential debate, I think it's not going to be something that people are going to talk a lot about. Of course, we're going to have, the media sort of debrief this. And overall, my impression, of both candidates here was sort of in terms of the form. In the beginning, Tim Walz looked like he was quite nervous to be on the big stage here on live TV for, one of the first times, really. I haven't really seen much of him. He was in one interview alongside Kamala Harris. There was sort of a scripted and pre-recorded interview, but here it was on a live forum. And in the beginning, he seems to be a little bit agitated. He had a little bit of trouble to sort of find the words that he wanted to say. And he looked a little bit nervous. He got a little bit better as the debate went on. And on the other side, you had J.D. Vance, sort of very calm and controlled and poised. And he had a lot more assurance to him than Tim Walz. And in terms of, the content of what they're saying and what was spoken here on this debate stage, I was a little bit disappointed with J.D. Vance here. I would have liked to see J.D. Vance sort of more aggressive, being on the offensive. There was many, many ways that he could have attacked Tim Walz and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And instead of doing that, instead of attacking, he decided to go on the defensive, but he didn't do a great job. And of course, no matter what, you don't want to be defensive in a public debate for a political election. You want to do the opposite. You want to be the one who is attacking the record and the policy of the other side. You don't want to try to defend, because at the end of the day, if you defend, then people are going to see you as weaker, and they're going to remember, oh, well, there's all these problems that are, sort of linked to, J.D. Vance and the policies. And if he's defending, it's because there are some problems. And in this way, J.D. Vance sort of gave a pass to Tim Walz. By defending, he, sort of implicitly gave the idea to the audience that there was not much that Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden ought to be criticized, about, when the truth is really the opposite. There were, a list, a never-ending list of issues that J.D. Vance could have attacked, sort of the Democratic establishment, and he didn't really take that chance. So, overall, I would have expected better for J.D. Vance. But in the substance, is there anything that's going to be marking about this debate? Are we going to see viral moments here? I don't think so. I think most of it is going to be forgotten quite quickly. I think, these vice presidential candidates, once again, they're sort of boring, and they're not very interesting. And as such, I think because the news cycle now is very, very intense, with the longshoremen on strike, the Middle East war intensifying, I think this vice presidential debate is sort of going to take a backseat, and we're going to forget about it quite quickly. But I would have expected more from JD Vance. Actually, I think he's a very smart guy, but maybe he got as instructions tonight, don't make any mistake, don't say anything inflammatory, don't make a spectacle about you. Try to keep the main focus of this election on Trump. And, if that was the strategy, I guess, well, he did the job. But I would have liked to see more from him. I would have liked to see a mini Trump from J.D. Vance, but that was not the case. I think we saw a J.D. Vance that is a more polished politician, sort of a mainstream kind of politician that's just going to say everything that everybody wants to hear and not create waves. Well, I guess that's his style, and perhaps this is what was asked from him by the Trump campaign. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this debate. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you don't mind. And I will see you very soon on the next video. Peace.
Hit me with that like and sub to the channel. Hit me with that like and click the effing bell. Click that bit, alright. The algo recommends for she don't like. The algo knows you well. Hit me with that like, subscribe to the channel. Hit me with that like and click the effing bell.